Okay, share my screen. All right, so this is kind of where we left off in our general introduction of at least historical ways of looking at mental illness and mental disorders, and at least in Western society, probably one of the big turning points um, uh, with the concerns of mental health and mental illness dealt with the witch hunts that started in Europe in the 14th century and can be followed clear up through the 16th, 17th, and even into the 18th century here in the United States. You'll probably all remember this tells about the Salem witch trials and those kinds of things. But I kind of want to explain some aspects of what ended up with the witch hunts and how they really have impacted our modern understanding of mental illness. Because while it was what happened was horrible, what happened was very unethical and very torturous. There are some lingering parts of what happened during the witch hunts that linger with us today, both in our legal systems, but in our views of mental illness and mental health. Okay. So, first of all, let's talk about what the witch hunts were. And if you think about in Western society, we get into the 14th, 15th, and 16th century. Specifically, we're kind of coming out of what was called the Dark Ages, where not much knowledge or I guess how you would put it. In Western society, they kind of went into a survival warring faction. Okay. And then what comes out of that, it starts with what's known as the Renaissance, where science and even religion and societal norms and societal expectations start to develop and take hold in the Western European areas. Okay. But also during this time, even though it was what we call the scientific revolution, the modernization revolution, there was still a lot of fear because what we have during this time is plagues. There's a lot of famine going on. And one of the things that is very kind of, I hate to say this, natural for human beings is when we can't really figure out why something is happening, we always tend to focus on the supernatural. Okay. So, for example, back until we understood weather systems, hurricanes, lightning, thunder were all, God's wrath. We could go back to, for example, Zeus. Earthquakes were due to the gods being angry, and all of these things that until they became explained through more physical or natural explanations tended to be resolved by saying they were something to deal with good and evil, evil spirits, good spirits, gods, devils, those types of things. And during this time, again, we have the plagues going on. We have famine going on, so growing seasons weren't going well and whatnot. And so a lot of society wanted to determine who is at fault, who is to blame for all of these social and environmental disasters that were happening during this period of time. Um, and one of the natural reasons, because we couldn't explain it at that time due to physical or naturalistic explanations, is it was because there were members in the community that went into pacts with the devil to try and put the devil's wrath through the community, and these were known as witches. Okay, and so again, what is going to occur is that who are going to be the witches? Well, most of them are going to be women. because again, you have a very patriarchal society where it's thought that men are more strong-headed. They're not as susceptible to being tempted by the devil, and women are more sexual and sensual and weaker. And so it must be women who are witches. Now, that's not to say that there weren't men who were tried during the witch hunts. Yes, there were. Some were convicted, but the vast majority of them were women and usually elderly individuals. Okay. Now, at this time, it's kind of interesting because at this time, there were individuals who were part of these communities that were what you would consider witches, and they were highly tolerated. They would be, in our modern terms, called natural healers. The modern Wiccan movement today would probably represent what was considered these individuals in the community. They tended to be the individuals that helped the sick and ill, but it was assumed that they were using supernatural means in order to do the healing. But because they were helpful, they weren't sought out and tried as witches. So they were given a certain other status. Okay. But so we have this fear, we have this thing, we have who we're going to blame for it. And so we're going to seek these individuals out, and we're going to try them in what would be considered their modern legal system. And then we are going to properly convict them. And then, of course, how do you help a witch be resurrected? While you can burn her at the stake or whatever it may be, because then the demon or the possessor will leave the individual's body, and the individual then can go seek grace of God in his arms. So this is kind of the situation that we have. Now, the first connection with modern mental health is this thing about things that we don't know we often contribute to those who are mentally ill or different than us. That, for example, when we look at someone who murders another individual, we always make this, we resolve cognitive dissonance because maybe we recognize that they're the same gender, the same race, maybe they're the same social economic status. So we instantly make this cognitive decision to relieve our anxiety that they're like us by saying that they must be mentally ill, they must be sick, they must be a mentally ill individual in order for them to do that awful thing. But what I hope that was proven in the social psychology section is that it doesn't necessarily take someone who is mentally ill to hurt or harm another individual. It just takes the situational variables necessary for that to occur. Okay. So this is the first connection that modern ideas of things we can't explain, like murder and all of those things, we then kind of supernaturalize and put some type of mental illness or mental deficiency onto that to create that cognitive distance between them and us. Okay. And this was clearly seen in the witch trials. Okay. The other aspect of the witch trials is what's known as the expertizing of the court system. Okay. It is going to be the first time in the court systems, both in the Europe and here in the United States, where we get the concept of expert witnesses. Okay. There's going to be individuals. There was a book written, the Malefication, I can't pronounce it correctly, that basically was a book that is very similar to the DSM-4, that gives some criteria to tell whether or not someone is a witch or not a witch. Okay. And with it came up with some diagnostic tools. Okay. Some of the more famous was the Sync or drowned idea. If a person sunk, they obviously were wicked. If they floated, they were good. There was the crying test where they told the story of Jesus on the cross, and if the person didn't produce tears, that was a sign that they were the devil and wasn't able to produce tears. Sadly, on that, that's kind of what convicted a lot of the elderly people, because as we get older, our eye ducts actually, did I say ears? Cry out of your eyes, crying. I think I said ears. Anyways, your eye ducts actually start to dry up. So as you get older, even in the most saddest moments, for some people or for a good number of people, you don't see actual tears because the tear ducts have dried up, or can no longer produce as many tears as possible. And so that is what many of the elderly individuals were convicted on. Probably one of the most suspicious acts was the witch pricker, which you probably will guess the actual motive behind this, because all witch prickers were males, and most of the individuals that went through the pricking process were young females. And this is where the young female would be stripped naked and all of her hairs would be pricked or pulled out until the person found the sign of the devil. Usually it was a birthmark or some mole or something like that. It usually was on the inner thighs or the legs of the individual. And they would go, aha, there's the sign of the devil. She is a witch. After he completely, I would say, assaulted the individual's body. It was actually, and sadly, yes, it was a very popular career choice for many men at the time. Okay, so getting beyond that, I just wanted to emphasize the idea of morality in the witch hunts kind of is very different. So during that time, I should just kind of mention off guard that you had the choice of either being, well, you didn't have the choice. If you were found to be a witch by the secular courts, you would go through the secular system. If you were found to be a witch by the clerical, you'd go through a church court type system. Just so you know which one was more evil, it was actually the secular courts that were much more brutal, because they wanted to find grace with the Catholic Church at the time, the churches that they were aimed at. So they wanted to find favor with them. So they were very brutal to the witches, whereas in the ones that went through the clerical or religious courts, they were not as tortured or punished or found as guilty as often as were the ones that went through the secular court system. But so let's go on though. So what is the connection between this and modern mental health and mental illness? Well, it comes up to the idea of the expert witness, the witch pricker, the person who did the floating technique, the one who did the weeping technique. And they would go in and, as an expert, claim based on their tests whether this individual was a witch or not a witch, based on the evidence that they gathered. Okay. Um, and so to kind of move on to modern times, that even after the witch hunts ended, the courts continued with the reliance on expert witness testimony. Okay. And interestingly, it has resulted in a mixed bag of things. But I should also note that it also kind of bled over into the treatment of mental illnesses altogether, because it was after the witch hunts that, when we more naturalize mental illnesses and stop putting it in such superstitious terms, that because there was a master diagnostician such as the witch pricker, then that witch pricker should know how to then treat the individual's ailment. Okay. So this is where the idea that if you have a mental illness or a mental deficiency, you should seek out an expert who can diagnose it for you. And then again, as we get into Freudian times, into the 18th and 19th century, you then go and you seek that diagnostician that then can treat your mental illness. Okay, this in Western society came out of the witch hunts, but even in our court system, um, this is where we get the idea of expert witnesses. And this is where I think it was last week I put out a challenge that said if we all had the same set of symptoms, and I sent you to 8 different therapists, that we'd come back with at least 6 or 7 different diagnoses. Hold on just a second. Sorry about that. Had a little bit of computer malfunction. Okay. Anyway, so we'll go on to the expert witness thing, and I just mentioned the diagnosis thing. This is the most interesting thing about being an expert witness, is you can have 2 experts who were trained maybe even at the same university, same graduate courses, maybe they even went to residency together, and have the same type of practice. Maybe they're both forensic psychologists. They read the same theories, they read the same research. They go in and probably do similar assessments of the accused criminal. Yet, dependent upon who they're working for, they can draw 2 different conclusions. One drawing one for the prosecution, and the other drawing a different one for the defense. Okay. And this, gang, is what I would emphasize about the current state of clinical counseling, psychology, therapy, and treatment, is that it's not a refined science. You can have so many different opinions, even though they have the same training, the same theories, and reach 2 different, completely different conclusions about the individual. And so I just want to bring this up because we do still have a lot of work to do when it comes to mental illnesses and mental health issues. Um, we still can't come to agreements about a person's abnormal behaviors and what drives them. And so, again, I would caution you to and be objective about the ideas about mental illness and whatnot, and make sure you draw your own conclusions and look at the research. But that's a soapbox issue. Um, one of the last kind of historical, or I wouldn't even say historical, but one common thing that I want to just view is kind of a Native American view. Now, I do want to caution everybody because this is a mistake that is made about Native Americans, is that there's this assumption that all Native American tribes are the same, believe in the same things, those types of things. And so I just want to state this. This is a very general statement. These things are kind of are common among several groups, but it may not apply to every Native American group. These are just some common things that anthropologists and sociologists have found. So I just want to put that disclaimer. But how have Native Americans and the medicine man, the idea of the medicine man kind of fit in there? Well, if we think about the medicine man, or a lot of times today in modern times, we consider elders, the wise people of our communities, the knowledge holders, the ones who know how to heal the community. If we liken the medicine man, they're very much likened to the experts that we see in Western societies, but they're going to view the natures of humans very differently. So it is common among Native American groups, again, not all, that dysfunction arises between disharmony between the person and nature. Okay. That's really, if you think about it, it kind of goes back to that similar idea that we talked about at the beginning of the semester about whether humans were good or bad. And we went over one of the theorists who said that what creates dysfunction in a society is when someone deviates from their nature, from nature itself. Okay, this is very similar to it, but there's much more of a connection between the nature and the individual. It's and when that nature is broken, then that's when we see a lot of dysfunction. Okay, is there scientific evidence for this? Is there, or at least data that supports this notion among Native American groups? And yes, there is. We often find that among especially Native American youth who deny their roots, deny their Native American heritage, leave the reservation right off the bat, and don't want anything to do with it, they tend to be at higher risk for mental illnesses, depression, anxiety, addiction, poverty, and homelessness. Okay. Now, again, I'm not all, I want to clarify this. It just puts them at higher risk. And so we do see that when there is this disconnect between the individual and where they come from and the nature that they belong to, it does tend to increase the dysfunction. Okay. And also, very common among Native American groups is a focus on the journey, that that life difficulties and troubles are a part of it. Okay. And that it's about these different places where you are in your life that you can overcome and develop more. Okay. And probably one that is the most common, that we find that the most common among Native American communities, is that the community takes care of the individuals who cannot take care of he or she self. That when we look at traditional Native American communities, those who were not able to take care of themselves were not ostracized. They were not seen as deviant or bad. No, the community would come around them, center around them, and try to help them heal from whatever they're suffering from. Is there evidence for kind of this idea among Native American communities? Yes, there is. We find that, again, the more individualistic a Native American community is, meaning the more westernized, the more colonized they are, the higher the amount of dysfunction we see within these communities. Because again, there's this deviation from traditional ways of knowing and carrying on what was historically the way individuals within these communities took care of each other. Okay. So again, this is a very, very general model. I would encourage you to look at it and within your own Native American experience, does this fit with where my people and where I come from? And then the rest just kind of keep as a general knowledge of potential others. So I would encourage you to do that with that model. Now, I would be remiss without stating this, that the major way that we assess and see individuals today is what's known as a biopsychosocial model. And I introduced this model briefly in the beginning of the semester, but I just want to emphasize it right now because as we go through the disorders starting tomorrow, we'll look at the biological, psychological, and social processes that then give a way to a potential mental illness. Okay. So the biological emphasizes things like genetics, neurotransmitters, those types of things. So we look at things like genetic markers, genetic triggers, those kinds of things. But we also look at brain chemistry and brain structure. So for example, when we look at depression, we're going to see that depression is associated with lower levels of serotonin. Anxiety is, no, not anxiety. Schizophrenia is an overproduction, is associated with an overproduction of dopamine. We'll see that PTSD is a combination of deficits in both dopamine and serotonin. And then when we look at the psychos part, sounds strange, we look at the thought processes that a person does. So a very common thought process for someone with depression is what's known as rumination. Okay. And rumination is when a person has a core belief about themselves. Maybe it's, I'm a bad person. Okay. And then through the confirmation bias, they go throughout their day and remember everything they did wrong. And then maybe at the end of the day, they ruminate about it and they go, gosh, I shouldn't have cut that guy off in traffic. Gosh, me and my wife got in an argument. Oh, here's evidence. I am a bad person. And then they will start developing other things that they've done wrong over the last week or so. Now, this is a general thing, but this is something that is going on continuously throughout the day. Okay. So again, part of treatment is to kind of stop these thoughts that keep interfering with the individual. Okay. The social aspect is, again, who a person surrounds themselves with. Do they have healthy support systems? And I do want to go back to, again, that Native American model and identity. Okay. One of the things that we have found that increases the efficacy of mental illness treatment is emphasis not only on thought processes and behaviors, maybe medications, those kinds of things, but emphasis on a person's social identity. Who do they belong with or to? Who are they? Who are they gender-wise? Who are they age-wise? Who are they ethnic-wise? Who are they culturally? And we've found by strengthening these identities, it actually increases the efficacy of any of the treatment modalities that we use in order to treat an individual. Okay. So I wanted to mention that general model. And then tomorrow, like I said, today was going to be kind of a short day. Tomorrow, we're going to start on some, we're going to look at some organic disorders. When we say organic, we mean that they're primarily driven by biological processes. Okay. So, for example, developmental disorders such as autism and ADHD, bipolar, where you go through extreme manic phases through extreme depressive phases, tends to be biologically driven, meaning that medical intervention tends to work a lot better than psychological intervention. Okay. Schizophrenia, again, is something that tends to be more driven or respond better to medical intervention than psychological intervention. Okay. And then we'll talk about others that are more of a combination, can be environmentally triggered versus biological, or more of a combination of those, such as depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the personality disorder that we're going to talk about, borderline personality disorder, which tend to be more environmentally triggered than these ones right here. And we'll start tomorrow. We're gonna start tomorrow with developmental disorders or childhood disorders, attention deficit hyperactive disorder, or an autism spectrum disorder. And one of the debates we're going to kind of get into tomorrow is, should we really be considering these things as a disorder, or should we look at these from what's called a neurodivergent perspective, meaning that it's not that these individuals are sick or ill or mentally deficit, but they think differently, and that we should actually appreciate the way that these individuals think and behave differently, because they bring a new dynamic to the table. They bring a new something to the table. So we'll look at these from the traditional disorder perspective, but then we're going to look at this idea of neurodiversity and whether we really should be considering these things a disorder, or should these what's called neuronormal individuals need to adapt to these individuals who just think differently than what's called normal divergent or neuronormal individuals, which I don't like that term, but that's the one they use. Okay, I'm going to stop.